Hello, and thank you for joining me again. This talk, I feel, is core to so much of what I've been attempting to convey to you in the videos prior to this. And it speaks of Jesus as he comes across in the scriptures. And this is the Jesus that we really need to know, not the Jesus that we may wish him to be. And then I want to talk about what this Jesus that we find in the scriptures wants of us as Christians. Obviously, these are two very important facets of in the life of anyone following Christ. Because if we are not following Christ as he is, and we're not living our lives as Christian as he wants us to, well, then we're going in the wrong direction. Why I say this is that we find in the Gospels examples of just how unready the people at the time were to accept Jesus as he was. For example, in Luke's Gospel, in chapter 4, verses 21 to 30, we hear the story of Jesus in his own town of Nazareth, speaking in the synagogue and telling the people that he was the Messiah, basically, because he read from Isaiah and said, this prophecy has been fulfilled today as we live. And the people were so angered because this was the son of the carpenter. This wasn't the Messiah they were expecting. They were angered to the point of taking him to the brow of the hill and wanting to throw him off and kill him. And it can happen to us as well that Jesus needs to fit some sort of a format that we expect of him, and we act accordingly as a result of that misled belief sometimes of who he really was. I have a thing to say about biblical films, and for many years I haven't been able to watch biblical films with any type of great enjoyment, because most often Jesus is presented as this figure who arrives and immediately strikes everyone around him as being someone special. And while words in the Gospels can be difficult to back up sometimes, and interpretations of these words may vary, it's very often the actions that speak most clearly and cannot be misinterpreted. And as I say, Jesus came as this very normal person as far as his fellow townspeople were concerned, and they were very put out when he arrived as a person other than what they'd expected, as I say, to the point of wanting to put him to death. This is the same Jesus, as I think I've mentioned in an earlier video, who as a first miracle changed water into wine at a wedding. And we can all imagine if God were to give me the gift of miracles, and my first miracle was to change water into wine at a celebration for a friend of mine, there would be a lot of criticism of my use of this great gift God had given me. And in a later video I'll talk about why Jesus did this, but for now to say that this is what Jesus did, and this type of thing is what contributed to people being angry with him, because they were not able to accept him as he came on this earth. We also read, for example, of how he transgressed the Jewish law, which was so important to people at the time, and they saw this as being the way of being saved, was to live according to this law very, very strictly. And for example, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 8, verses 1 to 3, we read of a leper who came up to Jesus asking for healing. Now, what was outstanding about this story is that the leper broke the law, the Jewish law, because he approached Jesus, and lepers were not permitted to approach anyone. But Jesus also broke the Jewish law because he reached out and touched him. And according to the Jewish law at the time, touching a leper made you impure. And so we see that Jesus was very much his own man. He didn't follow the crowds. He didn't follow what everyone else thought he ought to do. He did what he believed was right at the time. And he did so that we could follow his example of seeing that the person we are dealing with is far more important than any rule. We also see that he, for example, in Matthew, again, chapter 11, verse 19, where Jesus says that John the Baptist came neither eating nor drinking, and you said he was a madman, but the Son of Man comes eating and drinking, and they call him a glutton and a drunkard. Hardly what you would have thought anyone could have used to describe Jesus, even his most severe detractors. We know that when he walked into town where the people were thronging to see him, and Zacchaeus had climbed up into a tree to see him because he was small in stature, of all the people in the town, Jesus said, "Zacchaeus, come down, I'm coming to eat with you today." And this was great criticism, that he was not only a drunkard and a glutton, but but he also spent time with sinners. And we know that the outcome of that visit to Zacchaeus' house was that Zacchaeus converted, him and his whole household, we are told. And Jesus said, "Today salvation has come to this house." We know that when he was invited to dinner once, and a lady of ill repute came up and wept for her sins, bathing his feet with her tears and drying them with her hair, those around him thought very poorly of this way of behaving and of allowing her to do this, doubting that he knew who this was that was doing this. And so we see a Jesus who was very much outside of the realm of this perfect Messiah who arrived with very powerful messages and inconfutable proof of who he was. You see, we're very much aimed towards recognizing God's kingdom, power and glory, which are true. But of course, his kingdom, his power and his glory are not what we usually have in mind when we talk about that. Because, for example, his power is not what we mean by power, which is usually the capacity to overcome someone else and to make them do what you want them to do if you want to. His power is to love no matter what. And that's true power. And this is the Jesus that we need to come to know if we really want to serve Jesus and not some fabricated image of Jesus. And when we think of following Jesus, when we decide to become Christian, there's a very important gospel passage for us when Jesus talks to us and says, "You are the light of the world and you are the salt of the earth," as we read in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 and 14. You see, these indicate very strongly what we're here to do as Christians. Because salt is a very interesting substance. When we use salt for cooking, we don't put the salt in the food so that you would taste the salt. The salt serves merely to make the good taste that's already in the food come out and be perceptible by our senses. The good taste is in the food, not in the salt. And Jesus calls us the salt of the earth. As Christians, we are called to bring the beauty in the world out of the world around us and to make it perceptible to people. That's our calling. If you put too much salt in the food, you spoil the food and it becomes inedible. And so As I've also said in an earlier video, neither I nor anyone else can tell you exactly what your relationship with God must look like. But if there's too much of your perception in the other person's relationship, it can spoil that relationship, because that is an entirely personal relationship between them and God that no one else can live for them or can tell them how exactly it should be. We also fear that other people, are not Christian and that they will not be saved. Yet we know that Jesus said, for example, I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must lead them too, and they will heed my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. If we want to claim that only Christians are saved, we forget that we are limiting Christ, as if he can only operate within that system that we call Christianity. How he can operate outside of that system is not necessarily for us to know, but our faith should be that he can and will, as it says in the scripture that I've just read to you. In Mark's Gospel, chapter 9, John the Apostle says, Teacher, we saw a man casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he was not following us. But Jesus said, Do not forbid him, for no one who does a mighty work in my name will be able to soon after speak evil of me. For he that is not against us is for us. And so if we presume to dictate who Jesus can and cannot help, we are imposing limitations on those people and on him that are of our making. And Jesus has actually said that's not the way it works for him. You see, what we have to realize is that God is so much greater than us. And I happen to be Catholic, mainly I would say, because I was born into a family with an English father, but he came to South Africa on his own, where he met my mom, who was in an Italian family, and growing up in an Italian and Irish family, obviously Catholicism was the religion of choice for our family. But had I been born in another part of the world, I might just as easily have been Muslim. Now, I have 6 children, and I know that if any of my children, especially when they were little, and we are all little ones compared to God's knowledge, had have prepared or was to prepare a gift for me and really put all their heart into it and presented me with this gift, I would be most unlikely to say, well, it's not really something I like, so that's no good to me. I would greatly appreciate that effort, that sign of their love for me, that attempt that they'd made, and it would make that precious to me. And so it's impossible to believe that someone who earnestly follows what they believe to be God's will in their lives and really tries to live that out fully in their lives will arrive one day before God, and God will say, well, sorry, you were in the wrong religion. You should have found your way to Christianity, so don't come near me. As we hear here, Jesus says he has ways of leading other sheep with him, and they will listen to his voice. He knows they will. And so we can leave those people and those situations up to him. We are here to be salt to the earth, light to the world. Light shows what's around us. Light shows the beauty and the less beautiful things. It makes them more obvious, brings them to people's attention. And that's what we are here to bring to our world. And we will only bring it to our world by following the real Christ, the Christ that we come to know by spending time with him in prayer and meditation, speaking to him and listening to him so that he can give us growth. And this is my prayer for each and every one of us, that throughout our lives we continue to grow in this way. And may God bless you.